Hi guys, how are you guys doing? A very warm welcome to the session, people. A very good evening. I'm Ankana, your SST master teacher at Vedantu, and I hope all of you are doing amazing, that you're staying at home and you're staying safe. And I know this is one of the most awaited videos by everybody, and I was so excited when I finally started with this. So welcome to the very first session of the First World War of Independence, people. This is going to be amazing. Let's rock it together. Let's quickly get started. So we're going to start with the first chapter for class 10th, which is the First War of Independence. Now, in this, as you know, as per the revised syllabus, we are going to focus only on, a lot of things have been removed. If you're not aware of it, I have done a video on the revised syllabus. Please go back and watch that as well. So the idea, as I was telling you, of these while going through these chapters, as we have just started with the first one, going on forward is, we're just going to focus on the topics which have been prescribed, which has been told as per the revised syllabus by the board. Okay, so today this is what we are going to focus on. This is what is going to be our agenda for today. We are going to start with a quick introduction of how the war started, what was the reason, and have a look into it, followed by the causes of the First War of Independence. We will under this look at the political causes and the social religious causes. Okay, so let's get started with the introduction. So guys, as you know, Britishers came to India not just with the idea of having colonies and ruling the country. When they came here, that's not what they had in mind, because they had come to India long back, around in 1599 itself, which is somewhere between the 16th 17th century. They had entered the country. But when they had entered the country, the only idea in their head was to do trading. Okay, they were here only for business. But once they got in, once they settled in, and they started looking at the scenario around, like how stagnant the society was, how it was not being it was not on the path of growth, how people were negligent towards a lot of things, they realized that they could take the advantage of this and exploit the people, and ultimately be also able to rule, because India was one of the most richest countries at that time. We had a lot of resources in terms of spices, in terms of gems, and other natural minerals, resources. Everything was available here in abundance. So that's how it started. Okay, but the reason why, once they started ruling, if you see, the first war which actually broke is in 1857, and they had been ruling the country around before like 100 years. Then why did it not start long before that? So the reason behind that was these two. So the way they had started expanding, okay, as I told you, when they entered the country, the idea was only to trade. And then from one to two places, they started settling with the idea of ruling. But it had to expand, because that had now become their new purpose, new agenda to be in the country. Okay. So they started expanding, and the way they were doing it, one, it was rapidly expanding, but the conquest, the method, the process of conquest was something that was irritating, annoying everybody in the country. Okay, and also the consolidation of the British rule, which means, as I told you, when they came here, the power was not to be consolidated. They did not want to rule the country. So now they were becoming more and more concentrated. They were now becoming more and more stronger. They were growing as a ruler, right? So that's how the way they were consolidating, they were gaining power, was something that was not making a lot of people happy. And these two were the major rules why people started getting agitated and resented the government, and which ultimately led to the war. Now, what were these two things? So under these two things, they took certain steps, okay, and those became the causes of the war for independence. So let's look at what were these causes for independence. So also, now these are the causes that now we are going to focus on. One thing that I would like you to know over here is that although the proper war maybe broke out in 1857, and we know that the Britishers actually got really dominated only during this period. That's how it started. Somewhere around 1957, their dominion started. How did it started? So before this, as I told you, they were here for trade. So they were not doing it. So right in 1757, they won the Battle of Plassey. Okay, through this they got a farman, which mean and farman by the Mughal rulers, because inke pehle before them we had the Mughal emperors, like Mughal rulers were there, Mughals were ruling the country. So they got a farman, they got a notice, you can say, from them, according to which they were now not supposed to pay tax on the trade. The import and the exports were tax free for them, and that was after the battle that they won in Palasi. So that was the very first victory that they had, and that kind of encouraged them, and they started expanding. Okay, they started to realize that they could do more. Okay, they got greedy, and that's how they started expanding. And that's why in 1757 that war kind of marked their dominion, and which that is how their oppression started to flow throughout the country. Now, when this started, it's not like people were very happy to be suppressed by them. There were a lot of revolts continuously going on. There was not a single year, there was not a single day when it was not happening. However, it was only happening in isolation. Okay, people were doing it in small segments, only one particular sector in one particular area in the entire country, somewhere it might be happening, which means it was not strengthened enough. It was not strong enough to give the Britishers a proper shake. But when it happened in 1857, it shook the Britishers, and these were the reasons which led to it. Okay, so now we're going to understand the causes. So they started their domination in terms of expansion from 1757 to 1857. That is, and this expansion was going on rapidly. They were very rapidly expanding. Okay, and under this what they started doing was to increase their power. Like once their power after the battle of Palasi had increased, what they started doing was they started kind of rubbing with the other people of the government, people who were already a part of the country and the governance. The rulers and everyone was being upset by their policies. Okay, so they were making a lot of policy in order to expand. Those were economic those economic policies, though were a few were administrative policies, but all of this were actually doing nothing else but exploiting the existing system of Indian society, and it was affecting each and every segment of the people. Okay, and that is how the agitation between each and every segment started. Okay, the very first thing that they did was, see, obviously the Mughals were already ruling, so they had to replace the rulers who were already there. So the very first thing that they did was they replaced the rulers, they took away the titles, and that was the very first thing that made people upset. Okay, then the farmers, they were deprived of their rights. They were asked to pay high taxes. They were not given the basic land rights which they required. And they are already the classes which, they're already financially not very stable. They were not stable. Now, on top of this exploitation, also put them off a lot against the Britishers. The artisans, the craftsmen, they were struggling because there was an economic, they were not given the proper compensation that they deserved, because that's the injustice that the Britishers were doing towards them. And the artisans actually lost their livelihood and were not able to get enough money. So they were facing a lot of economic troubles. Okay, and then also not just that, the higher paid posts, okay, all the good posts, all the good titles were reserved only for Britishers. Indians in their own country were not even allowed to enter those positions, and people who were already in their positions were taken there, were disposed, their titles were snatched off from them, which had created a great amount of discontentment in those people now. And on top of it, you know how much religion matters and drives the people's emotions in country like ours, India. So the people, the religious leaders, the priests, the scholars, they found that the income, what happened was that the temples and all of these things were shut down, or tax were being put on them. And also the rulers had lost their jobs. Not jobs, the rulers had lost their positions. The rulers were no more in power to rule the country. So if the rulers itself were not there, who would actually encourage the religion? And Britishers were not at all interested in the encouragement of the religion. As a result of which, the priests, the scholars, whose income was dependent on the religious practices, was now being curbed. And as as absence of the Indian rulers in power, they had also now started suffering. So this was maybe the first time where each and every segment was suffering. Earlier, it would usually be some particular class or some particular segment of the society, but now with the Britishers entering India, it was everywhere. Okay, not just that, Indian soldiers, they were having a very hard time, because one, they were working for these people. In fact, the Indian soldiers had helped them to expand in a lot of places, but now they were only not receiving proper income. Okay, they were also being mistreated by the people of, I mean, like the superiors, because they were being more biased towards the British soldiers. And also, as I told you, the higher ranks were all reserved for them, and the Indians had to only work on one lower ranks. On top of that, the treatment that they had to face was very, very poor. So by 1857, in these 100 years, all of this consolidated together and brought out the reaction, which was just enough for people to trigger, to ignite that fire, and hence they went into that mass uprising, because it was just the right time. Okay, and this is all of this together led to the first war of independence. Now, under these causes, we are going to break them in different segments. So we'll look at the political causes, we'll look at the socio-economical causes, we'll look at the we'll look at the religious causes, and we'll also look at the economical causes. But today we are going to start with the political causes, followed by the socio-religious. Okay. So now, as I told you, they were rapidly expanding, guys, right? And so under which they had multiple things, they had taken multiple policies. So the very first thing that upset most of the people were their policy of expansion. Now this is the very first point under political, under the political causes that led to the war. Now this policy of expansion they did in four ways, because it was not possible for them just to fight and expand. So they had taken multiple approaches to spread their legs and arms in the country, to spread their presence. The very first thing was by outright wars. They would directly go to war and battles, directly wage wars. Okay, but then that was not the only option. So they were coming up with multiple policies and multiple they were using their brains and coming up with numeral you can say steps and policies through which they could expand and cover up more and more areas. So the another one was subsidiary alliance. The third one was through doctrine of lapse, and ultimately the final one was on the pretext of alleged misrule. Now let's dwell into these subtopics and understand in depth what is exactly meant by this. So by outright wars, as I told you, they would directly wage wars and go ahead with the battles. For example, Battle of Buxar in 1764. And by winning this battle, they had direct rule over Bihar, Bengal and Odisha. They once won this and took this entire region under them. Then there were series of wars in different parts. There were Anglo-Mysore wars, there was third Anglo-Maratha war, second Anglo-Sikh war, and they kept on having these wars. Guys, just to clarify for you all, Anglo actually refers to the white skinned English people, English speaking people. Basically, the Britishers are known as Anglos. Okay. Even now you might hear that he's Anglo-Indian, she's Anglo-Indian. Anglo basically refers to Britishers. So a lot of when they went back to Britain, a lot of them stayed back and then became a native of India and started their family here with Indians. So those are known as Anglo-Indians because they have their roots in Britain. Okay, so now they were waging wars. Battle of Buxar in 1764 got them control over Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, as I told you. Then Anglo-Mysore wars got them all the Mysore state. Then there were multiple wars that happened in Maharashtra. Finally, in the third Anglo-Maratha war, they got the north and the south region of the Narmada river. Okay, all of these areas were actually before this under the Peshwas. Peshwa, as you know, were the rulers in Maharashtra. Okay, you might have heard it in movies also, Peshwa Bajirao and all of those. So Peshwa is basically a king ruler in Maharashtra. So it was all under his under the Peshwa, but these guys after this third war took that away, which happened in 1817 to 1818. Then the Anglo-Sikh War, it was the second war that happened, which gave them the control over the regions of Punjab, and they kept on waging wars against different regions, which eventually gave them control over Sindh, Assam, Arkana, and Teraserim, and Pegu in Myanmar. So they expanded in those regions as well. If you remember, before partition, I mean like before independence, all of this used to be part of India only, including Pakistan, Myanmar, and all these regions. Okay. Then was subsidiary alliance. Now, what do you mean by subsidiary alliance? Now, not all the rulers were very, see, that was the reason why they got all of the strength, and you can say they had the audacity to be in our country and again have that bravery, have that courage to rule the people of the same country where they're actually over as guests. But that started because they realized that there were not enough strong leaders. There was no one strong leader, for that matter. Even when there was all those leaders ruling in parts, the rulers were not strong enough, and that was their power. That gave them a lot of strength. So once they realized that, they also came up with this alliance, okay, which is basically partnership. Subsidiary alliance. Subsidiary means people would now give up their sovereignty on their own. Okay, they will just say, okay, fine, come take our freedom, we do not want to fight you. Not all the rulers had the courage to fight with the Britishers because they were afraid of losing. So they decided to go into a partnership with them, to shake hands with them, okay, which is something a coward would do, but that's what those rulers were doing. They were compromising on their own rights, on their motherland, and had no high standard of morals and ethics. Okay, now this alliance, subsidiary alliance, was actually introduced by Lord Wellesley. Under this actually was an agreement through which the British India Company and the ruler, okay, of the princely states, whoever was there, would shake hands, okay, and they would come to an agreement that no matter what, they're going to lose on their supreme power of authority. So they will still be the nominal rule over there, just for the name's sake. However, the supreme authority of ruling, of all the decision making of that region, will be under the Britishers and the company. Okay, so now according to this, the Indian rulers had to accept their supreme power. As I told you, they would surrender all the foreign relations. Now, as you know guys, the Britishers were not the only people who had come to India for the trade purposes. There were more countries. So these countries were also, I mean, they could have been a direct competitor to the Britishers. So they were also trying to cut off and limit their powers by making sure that these princely states, one, are agreeing to the alliance with the British India Company. They're cutting off, they're limiting the powers of the other competitors so that they are not able to replace the Britishers. So they were not allowed to indulge with any other foreign countries, and they had to accept that the British and they had to accept that the British will be there as the supreme power. They will not indulge with anyone else in any sort of foreign relationship. They will surrender it. Okay, they also had to agree to have a British resident at their headquarters to keep an eye, basically like an ambassador. Okay, he would be basically ruling, he would just be a representative of the company residing in the headquarters. And they also agreed to maintain British troops. So the army was there, the army had to be taken care of. Now the Britishers did not want to spend their money on that. So who did that? The rulers who were in alliance ultimately had to take care of the British army that was employed over there by on their own expenses, which means that they had virtually lost their independence. As I told you, they also agreed. Other European countries were also in good power over there, but they made sure that they're not going to indulge apart from Britishers with any other European countries. Okay. So by 1856, we can say that practically all the Indian states had been annexed, had been taken over by the British India Company through one way or the other. As we say, through by hook or by crook, they had made sure to take control over all the Indian states. Now these were two ways, like one was to go ahead with wars, one other was to have an alliance under which the company would the state would surrender themselves. But there were also states which were maybe had a strong army who were not ready to surrender. Now how would they go ahead with that? So now they came up with this doctrine of lapse. Okay, now this was this new you could say policy that they came up with, and under which what they said was that if the rulers fail to have their own natural, okay, their own male heir, their own person who would who would lead the kingdom ahead, who would lead the family's rule, which happens in monarchy ahead, the kingdom would lapse, which means that the kingdom would fall automatically under the company's rule. And this is what had happened under in Jhansi as well. The ruler over there did not had his own blood son. He had adopted a son, Anand Rao, but the company disagreed. The Britishers disagreed to accept him as the ruler of the state of that place, and that is why Jhansi, I mean, like we all know Rani of Jhansi, Rani Lakshmi Bai, that how her struggle was, how had she to fight against the Britishers. So that is what had happened in 1856. That was that is an example of the doctrine of lapse. Okay, so also, I mean, they clearly said that Rani of Jhansi had to be pensioned and their adopted son was not recognized as the lawful successor. And the same thing happened in a lot of other states where they did not find enough resistance to go ahead. I mean, like Rani Lakshmi Bai offered a great resistance, and she was amazingly, like courageous, but not everyone was. And similarly in other states like that of Satara, Sambalpur, Udaipur and Nagpur, through this doctrine they gained power. Okay. Now another was on pretext of alleged misrule, which means they would say that the kind of rule that was happening in the state was not correct. There were a lot of malpractices, it was a misruling, and the ruler was not suitable, and that's why he had to be thrown out. And under this they actually removed the ruler of Awadh in 1856. He declared, they declared Awadh to be misruled by the ruler, and he said that because of this, the people are not getting good treatment which they deserved. They called it the good of the governed, which means it's for the good of the people who are being governed, and it was to ensure that the administration is properly going ahead. They removed the ruler. But the people of Awadh were agitated, very, very dissatisfied with this. Why? For two reasons. One, the way the ruler was removed. Okay, he was humiliated and he was disposed from his title, and the way it happened, it hurt the emotions of the people of Awadh because they associated with the ruler, right? And second, they said that it is for the betterment of the people. However, they had to face a lot of hardships, guys. Okay, you know what kind of hardships they had to go through. A lot of soldiers from Awadh were actually participating with the Britishers actively in their expansion, which was happening all around the country. They had never expected that it would happen in their own region and their own king would be thrown out. However, despite of supporting them, they received a lot of ill treatment. They were not given proper money. They were not having proper income, and they were also being ill treated, and there was a lot of bias against them and towards from the Britishers' end. So that is something that the soldiers were facing. But apart from this, the other segments were also suffering. The zamindars, okay, the landlords had a lot of land. The properties were confiscated by the Britishers. It was taken away from them under the government. As a result of which they lost all their power, and everyone was facing a huge financial crisis. Okay, now when the ruler was removed, the army was dissolved. The people who had different titles, thousands of them, of the nobles, the titles were snatched away, and their power and their financial status, everything was gone. And once they entered, they imposed such high land revenues and taxes on the people that everyone fell into this trap by the Britishers, where they were financially handicapped. Okay, so this is what had happened they just said that the people are being misruled. However, despite of removing the ruler and coming in power, it was the Britishers who were actually harassing the people, especially in Awadh. So this is how we saw they had started expanding. This were their policies of expansion. Apart from this, disrespect that was shown to Bahadur Shah Zafar, who was the last Mughal ruler, was also very disheartening, and it agitated a lot of Muslim people because of the treatment. So Bahadur Shah Zafar was actually, he had shook hands with the Britishers. Okay, he was actually their friends, but what they did was they denied to go ahead. So because he was under their protection, and he even used to get pension money, you can say salary, from the Britishers, but eventually that was denied. Okay, all his legacy was being destroyed. He was said that he will not have his pictures on the coins, on the currency of the country anymore. That upset a lot of people. Now, Mughals used to live in the Red Fort, that was their palace, but the Britishers said that his heirs, his further successors, will not be allowed to live in the Red Fort. They had to live into some other fort which was near Qutub Minar, which made them even more upset. Okay, his successors were also not given any noble, any imperial titles going forward. He was going to be the last one, and that hurt the feelings of all the Muslims, which Bahadur Shah Zafar was representing in a way. As a result of this, Zeenat Mahal Begum started, who was his wife, started plotting against the Britishers. Okay, then they did not stop here. See, they were ill-treating all the Nawabs, all the princes, all the rulers. Okay, and they did the same thing with Nana Sahab, who was the Peshwa, who was the ruler in Maharashtra. Nana Sahab was not the true heir. He was actually he was not the blood son. He was actually the adopted son of Balaji Rao too, who was the Peshwa in you can say, who was the last Peshwa of Maharashtra. Okay, but this person was actually forced to stay away from his family. He was forced to leave Kanpur as well. Okay, and he had to stay away somewhere else, and he was not even granted his money, his pension, which he deserved, which was his right, by the Britishers. Okay, and because of this, the entire Maratha region was resenting the Britishers. Now, Nana Sahab, as a result of this, was very disheartened and disappointed by Britishers, and he decided to mobilize everyone and make them aware of what the Britishers were doing. So he started traveling on his own expenses from Delhi to Lucknow to make people aware of, hey, this is what is happening. Let's join hands and fight the Britishers together. But people did not believe him. They actually grew suspicious, and his, you can say, initiative never became successful. Okay, and the final reason was absentee of sovereignty of the British. Now see, whoever before this, guys, you should know this, that whoever before this had come to rule the country had always ultimately settled in the country. We had a lot of foreign invaders. We had a lot of people from outside who invaded the country and who ultimately took over the country. Mughals, for example. But ultimately, no matter who came from whichever part of the world, settled here except for the Britishers. What do we mean by this? Their headquarters were not here. It was directly in Britain, and it was being ruled from there. If you look at Mughals, although they conquered India after, they came from Persia or wherever of different part of the country, but the Mughals, the emperors, settled here, and whatever revenue was generated, whatever tax they would collect, whatever expenses were there, the money ultimately of the country was spent on the people of their country, because the kingdoms, India was their kingdom. But with Britain, it was not the case. The center of power was in Britain, and all the taxation, all the money that was being collected was ultimately being drained to England and not being spent on the people of India, and that not for their welfare, not for their betterment. No growth was happening, and that is what highly disappointed and dissatisfied the people. Now let's see what happened in the social, religion and religious segment. So over here, now see, when initially the Britishers came, okay, they were specially, initially they came for trading. So they had no business with the social or the religious condition of India. But once they started taking power after 1757, you could say, in that region, in that period of time, which was the beginning of 18th century, the beginning of their rule, they were like, hey, I don't care about what religion and what you're doing. I'm not going to interfere with your social and religious life. You do whatever you want. but that kind of started fading away as they moved from 18th to 19th century. They kind of started changing their like the sentiments and the take on and conduct on this changed. They now started putting their leg into our business. Okay, they started interfering, although they did do a lot of things, bacho, you should know this, that they did a lot of things which was actually for the betterment of the society, but their approach was not correct. Why? Because they did not take into consideration the way they were introducing these policies. They forgot that people were highly driven with their religious emotions over here, their beliefs, and that hurt the religious emotions of the people to a great extent. For example, abolition of sati, the Widow Remarriage Act, which was introduced in 1856, then opening of Western. So girls did not used to get educated before in our country, as you know. So the idea of educating girls was a very noble idea. It was a very nice idea, but the Western education to girls was not received very positively by people, because they thought that it was some hidden agenda or conspiracy that the Britishers were doing because of the way it was introduced among the people. Then there were a lot of modern innovations happening, but people were not very open to it. They were very apprehensive. They're very, you could say, reluctant, and they were also having a lot of doubts. That was because there were a lot of rumors going around, and they thought that this modernization was being done because they ultimately wanted to exploit the population and use it against them only. For example, introduction of railways and telegraphs were done, which was good, but people were very suspicious that it was being done with a hidden agenda. Okay, they in fact, for telegraphs, there was a rumor that these telegraph poles that are there has actually been put over there, is standing there to hang the people who are going to rise against, who are going to stand against the Britishers. So such kind of rumors were making people suspicious or not open to these changes, which was actually somewhere done for their own betterment. Then there were a lot of orthodox, conventional, traditional Indians who were not open to change, who were very old school. Now these people were not happy with the kind of differences that were being vanished, that were being abolished by the Britishers between the different castes, between the higher and the lower castes. So in railways, or for that anywhere matter anywhere else, the castes were always dominating. They were very, you can say it was predominant in the Indian society. People were always divided into castes, and high caste people used to get more privilege, were always privileged than the lower caste people. So even, like, as you know, people were not allowed to enter in temple, public wells and things were not accessible to the people of lower caste, and all of these things existed. So the Britishers gave no damn about all of this. They were not concerned. So everyone in the railway would travel together. There would be no caste system that the high caste will sit there and the low caste will sit there. Everyone used to sit together. And the orthodox, the traditional conventional Indians were very disappointed by this, and they got offended, really offended by this by this policy or behavior of the Britishers. Okay, they started believing that the Britishers are doing this, they are defying, they're not following their caste and religious system on purpose. Then it was not just that. All the people in administration, corruption has always been something that makes the system hollow right from inside, and it existed at that time as well. Okay, so the police people were very petty, they were very greedy, okay, and they were very corrupt. If you go to them, they would ask for money, they would torture people, they would, instead of helping them. So there was a lot of dissatisfaction, because a common man, especially who was not very powerful, let's say who was not very rich, was being looted, was being oppressed, okay, and he was being exploited the most. And as you know, the rich, the creamy layer in India in any ways has been very less. Who is the mass? The mass has always been the peasants, the common people, the middle class people, the working classes, and that is the class that the police were torturing. Okay, so that grew, I mean, like a different kind of feeling of oppression, which united all of these people who were in masses, who were actually making the major population of the country. Not just that, the kind, the judicial system, how it was designed, it was actually to help the rich over the poor, as a result of which this complex judicial system was oppressing the poor even more, who were already a victim of their own financial situation. Okay, they would be tortured, they would be hit, they would be beaten by the people, okay, and they were being imprisoned by the cultivators because they did not have the ability to pay a lot of money. And this, as a result of this, the poverty kept on growing even more, which made the people a lot agitated and aggravated, and they kind of combined together and got united. No, it did not stop at that. They even started with racial discrimination. There was a discrimination based on races. So they used to be very rude and arrogant towards Indian. As I told you, when earlier Britishers came in 17th century, they had no business with our religion, with our races. They did not used to differentiate that I'm superior or you're inferior. But that eventually started happening as we started moving from 18th, from 17th to 18th to 19th century. It kept on increasing, guys. Now people were being dominated on the basis of this. Okay, they had started acting superior because of their color, because of the religion that they were following. Okay, and they were following this policy of contempt. They were holding hard feelings against the Indians. They were looking down upon them. Okay, and Muslims were, you can say, they were being very, very cruel towards them. They were said to be unfaithful, and they were mistreating everybody and insulting all the people for whatever they were doing. Then a follow-up of this was that they had also started, now earlier they was not interfering with the religion, but they now also started doing that. Earlier it was none of their business how we were practicing and what we were practicing in terms of religion, but now they started denouncing, kind of, you can say, denouncing is basically opposite of praising something. So they were now saying, oh my god, they were bad mouthing all of this. They were saying that idol worship is not the correct way of doing it. I mean, not the correct way. They were like, people should not be doing this, and they started kind of propagating conversion into Christianity. They started promoting Christianity more and more. And after 1830, the missionary activities, the Christian missionary activities increased all of a sudden. The idea was again to mobilize, to convert more and more people. Okay, also the converted people were getting more benefits, so people for that reason had also started converting, which was creating a lot of fear among the Indians who were already there, who were very religious, you can say. Now it just did not stop at that. As I told you, a lot of people were converting, so they introduced a new law of property. Now earlier it used to be like, if I am Hindu and my son gets converted into Christianity, he will be disowned. It would be completely my choice, but I could just disown him and he would have no rights on the properties. However, they introduced the Religious Disabilities Act, under which they changed the Hindu law property, according to which, despite of the conversion, my son could still have access to my property, could still, be a heir of my property, if despite of converting into a different religion. Now that also had pissed a lot of people off. And apart from, it just did not stop there. They had now started introducing Western education system. As I told you, they were also educating girls. So now this made people feel that they're doing it because they're trying to mind wash people in the schools. And the education system before this was all about religious education. Okay, people were religiously being educated. It was the priests and the Maulvis who would educate people, you can say, in the temples, in the madrasas. But now that was shifting. There were being proper centers established where Western education system was being introduced. Now the idea why people were doing that, because they wanted to create laborers for them who would understand English, who would be familiar with the education system, so that they could make them work, the Britishers could make them work for them, under them. But the people did not take it like that. Either way, it was wrong. The people perceived that they are actually trying to discourage their traditional learning, to discourage their religious learning. Okay, and they're trying to make a shift from the Oriental learning to Western learning. Guys, Oriental means something that is related to the Asian region, okay, especially which is towards the south of the Himalayas, which refers to the Indian part. So they realized that they had this fear that they're trying to change the orientation. They're trying to change the emphasis from the Oriental learning to the Western education. They're trying to modernize, Westernize the people of India and discourage the value of religious teaching. And they believed that it was just started with the whole idea, with the whole purpose of getting people to school and ultimately mind washing them to convert them into Christianity. So these were few major regions which had created a lot of dissatisfaction among the people. With this, we have seen the political and the socio-religious causes which led to the agitation among the people. Now in the next session, we will also be looking at the economical causes. Okay guys, so this one last point before we move on and end the session. So the taxing religious places. So earlier, before the Britishers had come, who no matter whoever was ruling, even the Mughals, they did not used to put tax, they did not used to have taxation on the temples, on the mosques, basically places where people used to practice religious stuff. But the Britishers introduced that, and that had hurt a lot of sentiments, a lot of emotions, religious emotions of the Indians, because as I told you, we have always been very, very sentimental about religion, about castes and all of these things. Okay, and they were honored that people were always exempted from all of this with the previous rulers, which now changed when it came with the Britishers. Now a lot of people, especially priests and Maulvis and I mean you can say the religious leaders, all of their dependencies, financial dependencies were on these religious places. Okay, but now they were being taxed, now they were being charged tax for it, which was making it very difficult for them to run their livelihood. And that is why, that was another reason why people got agitated, and everyone who used to follow them started following their you can say the protest against the Britishers. So with this, we are done with today's session. Let's look at a quick question before we move on. On what charges Awadh was annexed in 1856? Misrule, traitorship, exploitation of trade, all of these. Guys, make sure that you put the answers very fast in the comment box. And if you don't like and subscribe, your name will not be popping up in the leaderboard. So make sure you answer not in the live chat but in the comment box, and you like and subscribe the video and the channel. Okay, I will see you again in the next session, wherein we will be looking at what were the other reasons which led to the causes, which were the causes of these wars and led to further Britishers ultimately leave the country. Okay people, stay safe, stay home, have a great day and good night. I will see you again very soon. Bye bye guys.